The worst crash in NASCAR history took place on a February at the Daytona International Speedway. That's probably the last thing you wanted to hear through your earbuds. Another NASCAR YouTuber with an unbearable cadence saying a cliche statement. Daytona in February is most remembered for historic moments of NASCAR champions, lovable losers, and 20-year-old birthday boys changing their lives forever. Also stored in your hippocampus, the part of the brain that really makes you remember things, is the recollection of some of the most surreal crashes that still, to this day, make you blink twice. Did a crash of that magnitude actually happen? Is it real? That's what many NASCAR fans thought on February 23rd, 2013, when they witnessed, and some even experienced, a crash they only thought was possible on a glitched NR 2003 simulation.
I looked back and there was a lot of smoke and the fence was gone.
I saw a piece of metal go flying through the air, and as I watched it, it hit a man up behind us.
When it hit his head, it came off and it hit his wife's stomach and went into her stomach. She was bleeding pretty good.
NRF Productions presents the worst crash in NASCAR history. Speed Weeks as a whole is like, but also not like, the sensation you get on Christmas. You sit there and nag your parents to wake up so that they can come downstairs, officially give you the remote in this instance, to finally find channel 206, in this case ESPN. It was now officially time to unwrap your present. What is it? The annual 120-lap, 300-mile prelude to the Daytona 500 that just so happens to kick off the NASCAR Nationwide Series season. If there was one universal word to describe this 40-car grid, it would be accomplished. Cup champions, Daytona 500 champions, IndyCar champions, and even an X Games gold medalist would be on the grid for this race. Sprinkle in a few of NASCAR's up-and-coming stars that would bear the torch for the Motorsports League in the 2020s. The legitimacy of talent behind the wheel would not come into question. What the race teams would question on that day was whether their driver would have enough water to make it through the race, while ironically at the same time the drivers had a Gatorade water bottle full of H2O within arm's reach. Alright, that statement right there was a bit murky on my end, so let me purify what I just said. Various cars were pushed to their breaking point due to the pushing required to be competitive in tandem style super speedway racing. Kyle Busch drove the monster car, but he and his team didn't realize the consequences of leaving this beast dehydrated until his car overheated and sidelined the 2009 Series champion from the race. On the entertainment side though, NASCAR fans were loving every single second of this race. This style of pack racing really brought out a congested race. You had plenty of different manufacturers, different drivers that were running up at the front being competitive. In fact, this race right here set the Daytona Nationwide Series record for different leaders. Every single driver in this field wanted to put himself or herself in the best possible position to win. So what is exactly the problem with that? The super speedway style of racing meant that everybody could be thrown under a blanket. Restrictor plates create close racing, and close racing creates the big one. Hornish Jr. famously coined the phrase, "When you sign on to be a competitor, you sign on to the risk." Every single driver on that last lap was willing to live with the consequences just to have a 1 in 40 chance of winning at Daytona. This crash starts out as your cliche super speedway wreck. Brad Keselowski makes a move, Regan Smith throws a bad block and gets sent into the outside wall. Where the wreck doesn't stick to the script is when Brad Keselowski slows up. Teammate Sam Hornish Jr. gives him a friendly tap on the back bumper as part of a "hey, thanks for saving me" gesture. Just kidding, Sam unfortunately couldn't slow down as fast as he did when avoiding the 60 car earlier in the race, drifting the 22 up into Kyle Larson. This was a 20-year-old at the time, touted by Jeff Gordon and Tony Stewart as the future of NASCAR. Fans believed he would soar to great heights in NASCAR, but I don't think they wanted to see this figure of speech tested out literally in real time. Kyle Larson, for a few seconds, was like a leaf falling from a tree, completely helpless as an object susceptible to a stronger force. But how is this any worse than Bobby Allison in 1987? The cars were unrestricted back in the day, much faster, and the catch fence was a lot lower. Or Neil Bonnet's 1993 flip that forced NASCAR to introduce the roof flaps. In recent memory, Carl Edwards flying into the catch fence at Talladega in 2009 injured 7, including Blake Bobbitt, a 17-year-old at the time, who was airlifted from the track to be treated with a broken jaw. As Larson's Camaro soared through the air and caught the catch fence in the worst place possible. At Daytona, there is a crossover gate. Through this gate, fans on race day can access the other side of the grandstands like pre-race grid walks, concerts, and much more. On race day morning, NASCAR fans prepped for this by packing a poncho because Florida weather. What they didn't think they'd need to pack was a gladiator shield, something that they would need to protect them from the avalanche of car parts that would rain down on them. The car's engine, which had a lot of effort put into it in the off-season by the Hendrick Engine Shop, found a new home just feet away from live spectators. One of Larson's front wheels flew several rows into the Daytona grandstands. And this wasn't the first instance of a wheel going rogue at a motorsport event. In 1965, just as quick as Richard Petty's Plymouth Barracuda could go from 0 to 60, the Dye family would unfortunately lose their 8-year-old son Wayne when Petty's car had an issue and the left front tire was not interfered at all with by the neck-high catch fence. The difference here between 1965 and 2013 was the fact that a lot of fans didn't have a 4-foot barbed wire fence to protect them from oncoming debris. Shannon Devine sat in the 19th row 250 feet away from all the carnage. She described this scene as one in absolute shock. She wasn't aware if a car had went past the fencing that was torn down and into the grandstands on top of people. As an emotional person, in that moment she started to cry. Another fan, Whitney Turner, wondered if she was ever going to see her 5-year-old again. Turner was consumed with a horrifying feeling as she laid down injured just feet away from Larson's burning engine. Whitney would later survive the crash but suffered a shattered right fibula and a severed Achilles tendon. The real hero of this race wasn't Tony Stewart, even after tying the late Dale Earnhardt Sr. with 7 Nationwide Series wins at Daytona. The heroes of this race were the safety workers that went into a scene comparable to a war zone, an anxiety-induced setting littered with debris and people screaming out for help. These brave men and women on that day brought some much-needed order to a Daytona International Speedway that was infused with chaos. Every single NASCAR driver involved in this crash, yes, even Kyle Larson, walked away unscathed. For at least 28 spectators, that wasn't the case, 7 of which were taken to the Halifax Health Medical Center for further evaluation. On top of that, 2 of those fans had their condition listed as critical. For someone that was once 14 years old, my most traumatic experience was watching Jeff Gordon lose the 2014 championship. For another fan, his worst memory as a 14-year-old was getting critically injured in the Daytona grandstands. It's safe to say that our worst things that we had to experience are on completely different levels. But no spectator left the Daytona International Speedway with as much PTSD from this race as Alan Davis. On that fateful day, the Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania resident was struck in the head by a heavy piece of debris, fracturing his skull and leaving him with a life-altering brain injury. For the rest of his life, he will need medical care and a full-time healthcare advocate. Fortunately, the past, present, and future medical expenses of Mr. Davis will be taken care of thanks to a settlement with NASCAR back in 2017. Does it really matter though? Because the injury of Alan Davis has hurt his short-term memory, cognitive ability, and even personality. As a result, Davis has had a hard time finding employment since the crash. Alan's one wish after this incident was that NASCAR could become safer so that nobody could get seriously hurt. The response to these terrible circumstances is a mixed bag. NASCAR is, well, NASCAR, a billion-dollar industry. NASCAR wasn't going to cancel the Daytona 500 of all races. The show must go on, as they say, as track workers pulled a near all-nighter to get the catch fence fixed around 2 a.m. 10 hours later, the 55th running of the Daytona 500 went green. And as for this race, it was abnormally tame. One can say that the Generation 6 race car was inexperienced in the draft, but with the image of Kyle Larson's car destroying the catch fence still in their minds, you have to wonder if the strategy of the drivers behind the wheel changed, at least to have a more conservative approach until the Harley J. Earl was on the line. For 2014, NASCAR outlawed the tandem drafting for the Truck Series and the Nationwide Series. That move has reduced the amount of violent crashes that we've seen in those divisions. As for NASCAR's Cup Series, the new Super Speedway package makes aggressive pushing basically essential. Whether you're inside, outside, or middle, pushing the car in front of you can speed up your line by 2 to 3 miles per hour. Basically, your line is going to the back if you can't effectively bump draft. We've seen the entertaining parts of this through photo finishes and crash footage for the cliche NASCAR crash compilation YouTubers, and we've also seen the ugly parts of it in races like the 2020 Daytona 500. The race concluded with Denny Hamlin aggressively tandem drafting with Ryan Blaney, giving the quote-unquote king of unfilled potential way too much momentum that he just could not harness properly. Ryan Newman suffered the consequences of risking it all to participate in this style of racing. With the introduction of this new package and the reconfiguration of Atlanta to race like a super speedway, a case can be made that NASCAR has doubled down on entertainment at the expense of safety. Based on all that he has been through, if Alan Davis spends the rest of his life NASCAR sober, one could hardly blame him. It is miracle work that the last lap crash in the 2013 drive for COPD 300 wasn't way worse than what it turned out to be. A few more things go wrong, and this could have been the NASCAR equivalent of the 1955 Lamar wreck that killed tons of spectators. Based on what this crash could have been, the casualty rate, not the fatality rate, and just the terrifying thought of car parts raining down on spectators, as of this recording, the worst crash in NASCAR history took place on the last lap of the 2013 drive for COPD 300 on February 23rd of 2013. If you like this video in particular, I did one on Jeffrey Bodine's 2000 Daytona crash a few years back. Plus, if you want to know more about car owner Rick Hendrick, I seriously recommend the Rick Hendrick NASCAR Iceberg. Other than that, this is Nathan for NRF Productions. Life's a beach, and then you drive.